Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Hi, this is Tammy Patzer, and my guest today is author Dean RENFRO. And Dean is the CEO of Business Profits Academy, a coaching and consulting business designed to help small businesses generate more leads and make more profits. He is also a husband, father, pastor, and grandfather, and he's passionate about helping individuals and families capture their life stories, moments, precious memories, and share them with generations to come. He has written not one, but 2 books, and they are a labor of love from Dean's own personal journey to capture some of the precious memories of his mom's life when they learned that she had Alzheimer's. Welcome, Dean.
Tammy, thanks for having me today. I really appreciate the opportunity to just share with your listeners and with you, this thing that kind of gets a hold of you in life sometime, and you realize, this is too important to just let go of and not see something happen from it. So I really appreciate getting to share today with you.
Well, good. Before we get into the books, let's tell everybody a little bit about you and your background, because you do have quite the history. So let's kind of start with a little background about you. For example, where do you live? And most of all, why do you write?
Yeah, well, I was born in the shadow of the walls of the Texas prison in Huntsville. At that time, the only prison in in Texas, that was called the Walls Unit. And of course, now it's known for its infamous place of where they deal with hardened criminals. And from there, I've lived in small towns, big cities here in Texas, and been involved in very different places. So as far as Texas goes, I've got a pretty big handle on the Texas culture, which your listeners can probably tell. Yeah, that guy's from Texas. It's kind of the funny thing is I had never been out of Texas until I was almost 20 years old. And sometimes people find that hard to believe. They just don't really realize how big Texas is, that you can go a long way and not get out of Texas. And all of that, I've in the 40-something years that I've been involved in small businesses and pastoring in particular, and starting new churches, which kind of led to the necessity of being able to kind of fund yourself. I've kind of been a jack of all trades and business, several different kind of businesses in different towns and places. So it's kind of led me to kind of have that involvement, and that kind of led me to some journeys along the way where I realized there are things important that you need to pass on to people. There's things you need to share with business people. There's things that you'll learn that are valuable to other people. So I kind of began to realize the need to write. Now, I've known about the need to write ever since I got out of college, and it's kind of one of those things where you kind of stumble along, and think, I need to do something about that. I need to write about that. Yeah. And finally, one day, it just kind of ran over me like a truck, and I realized I got to start writing.
So obviously, something happened that made you realize it was time to start writing this stuff down. So what was that moment?
Well, back in part of it, I have to go back to some of the seminary experience and being a part of the dean, the president's staff, and going around and going different places. We would have conversations. Of course, he has several doctorates, and he was always talking about dissertation and research and study and how important that was. And so that kind of birthed inside of me some things that, I've got some things I need to say. And then life gets busy, and, you have kids, and you're here and you're there, and we're moving and all those kinds of things. But as it began to move toward that, and I began to do ministry across the United States, I began to realize I've got some things that I know and understand that other people don't. And about the only way to really communicate that and to get an inside track with people when they don't know you is to have a book. And some exposure to people like Dan Kennedy and Mike Koenig's I began to realize that book concept is a ticket into people's lives and to people's businesses and opportunities that you can share with people, because simply people don't, they don't throw a book away. They don't put the, they don't hide the book. They might put it on the shelf and never read it again. But the fact that you're an author creates different kind of opportunities for you. So partly through personal growth, exposure to some people who were prolific writers, who were successful prolific writers. I lost track of how many books Dan Kennedy has, but he's written about all kinds of things, and it may, it's a totally different niche, but just the fact that there's exposure to the fact that you're walking around all the time with all this experience and knowledge and information that you're encountering, that if you don't put it into something like a book, it's going to get away from you. So that kind of sparked the whole idea. And then 6 years ago, when my mom was died, back in the late 90s, early 2000, when my grandmother had died, my mom's mom died. She was in her 90s. I began to think about that then, going, a lot of history and life experience and personal stories just left this earth. And yeah, my mom knows them and my aunt knows them and my uncles know them. Well, first thing you know, two of my uncles die, and then my aunt dies. And then I realized Mom's it. Mom is the story that's left, and we better do something. And then we discover she has Alzheimer's. And so then it began to be a scramble to try to, how do I take what Mom has and the stories Mom has and move them into something that's more permanent to share with my kids and grandkids. And of course, part of that came about because of us living all over Texas. We weren't living next door, to Grandma. And so some of those stories were, going to have to come through me to get to my kids. So that began we better do something here kind of big why thing of why we're going to write now.
So basically then you were really inspired by the fact that you saw the fact that your mother was the last of the long line of the story keepers or tellers of the stories. And if you didn't figure out a way to capture that, the stories would disappear unless you had them. So you have 2 books that you've recently published. So what are the titles of those? And then you can kind of describe what those books are.
Yeah. These 2 books are totally different. I have a business book that I wrote, but these books are totally different. Basically, these are a labor of love, a passion experience that has kind of led to that. The first book that we put out and made the bestseller is they all have long names. I got that from the Dan Kennedy thing. Say what you're going to say in the title of the book if you can do it. So the first one is the official. And of course, official's capital, but so people are looking for it. But it's the official. Here, I'm just drawing a blank. That's terrible. I've had to talk about it so many times.
The Nana and PawPaw book.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, yeah. It's the official Nana and PawPaw memory making starter guide, and then it's got a long subtitle to it. And then the second book, I decided, wait a minute, I need to shorten it up so I can remember it better, because you just got an experience of that. And it's the official making memory starter guide for, and in this case, it's moms. And it talks about the fact of the book is really written out of the experience of how do you move past the good intention, and so that's kind of how the book kind of got started.
So is what exactly is in the book? And if I want to capture my family stories, give me kind of an idea of how the books will help me.
Yeah, well, kind of out of my own experience, I would talk about, I need to write that down, or I need to record that, or I need to remember that, and I need to make sure, this happens and that happens. And so I realized that as most people who start writing, or at least many people who write and then start to write, there's this huge blankness that, just like I had just a moment ago, come over you and like, well, what am I going to write about? And how do I do that? And so they kind of look at the blank paper, or in this case, even a blank screen, and they never get anything down. Or they look at their phone and they know, well, I could do this on my phone, but they never do. And so the guide, the memory, making memory starter guide, is just that. It is a journal that is kind of here's how you get started. And so what I did is we took 50 questions that people could ask, kind of the interview approach of the newspaper reporter, to give you an opportunity to start writing the answers down. So while the book is not prolific in stories and content, it is prolific in the opportunity to start writing these things down. And so it's a journal, kind of based on a journal approach, where you start writing them down, and you answer the question, which basically starts building a story for you. I learned that feature from Mike Koenig's, and that you start asking the right questions, you'll start getting a story. And so the idea here is then to begin the story. Then in various parts throughout the book, we talk about, well, here's the way to use technology to help you continue the story to the generations to come, like the simple concept of now every smartphone has a camera and a recorder on it. So just turn the camera on and the recorder on and talk to your future audience, whether it be your kids or your grandkids or your great grandkids, or even generations to come that aren't born yet. Introduce yourself, tell your story. And that's kind of how the book is designed, to give you a way to get started, answer questions. And then we have things in there like talk about, mistakes that you made in life, or tips that you would have, or traditions that your family practices, or things you want to make sure that people know about. Things like medical history, like we discovered from my grandmother and her going into the latter years of her life, and that she carried this certain trait in her blood. And of course, kind of led us to some things to realize, well, what is that? And we found out that I was a carrier of it, and then that one of my kids is a carrier of it, and which is fine until they marry somebody else that has the same trait, and then their kids would have terrible deformities. And we realized, oh, okay, our kids need to know about that, And so that's kind of one of those stories. Had not that happened, some terrible things could happen to my grandkids, had that not happened. So that's kind of the idea. And then of course, favorite things that your parents have, like in the grandparents one. And of course, it's a lot of stories about values and tradition, and talk about things that nobody else would know about. Tell some stories on your grandparents and parents. Kind of get back at them that your kids and grandkids would need, that they would never know because they've never met these people. It was like in my case, my kids never got to meet my grandmothers on either side of the family. So they're stories I tell, that I'm going to tell my kids and grandkids that's the only way they're ever going to know about them. And then the mom's book is the same, designed on the same idea with different sets of questions. Because, there's just a lot of things that, we talk about intuitions that you had, and things you thought about your kid, and what makes what makes kids special, and because moms love all their kids, but each kid's kind of got their own, endearment to their mother. Like one of our kids, our oldest kid, it took 19 hours of labor to get her into the world. So my wife's got a special story about all that. And I got my special story about that. And I constantly remind my daughter of the turmoil that I went through. Nothing like labor, but, the turmoil. And I remind her daughter, this is not going to happen to you. And then our second child was an emergency C-section. And so he's got his story that we tell about him, and all the things about that, and some things that happened at birth. And then our third child, he was, of course, had to be a C-section, but he had a totally another issue when he was born. And I had to snatch him up and fly him to, 300 miles to a specialty hospital, leaving my wife behind. So there's all these stories. I don't know whether they're going to share those with their kids and grandkids or not, but I am, because I'm going to put them in this. Me and my wife are putting them in this book. So that's the idea of the gist of the book, of how it helps people get started telling the story, kind of a thing.
Yeah, well, I'm listening to you. I'm thinking about my children and how each one of them has a story. And my youngest son, he's, I swear the kid has had a smile on his face since the day he was born. He's just a happy person, so I can really relate to that. And then as I listen, I'm listening to you and your accent and how cool it would be 100 years from now if your ancestors could hear you telling a story from in your own voice.
Right.
And how they could hear the nuances and the voice inflections and the accent. And so I really like this concept of giving people a guide and the story prompts to get started, so that you can leave this legacy to your, like you said, your children, grandchildren, and all those future generations. I really like that show on TV, Who Do You Think You Are, where they go back and all they have are maybe every now and then it might be a diary or a signature or legal records,
Right.
and that's all they have
Yeah.
to try to piece together their ancestors. And just think of the power of this, when you actually have real documentation in all of the media that we have available today. That's really cool. So who do you think would really, really appreciate your books?
Well, given the the environment in which we live, nothing's private anymore. But yet, there's things I want to say to each one of my kids, and to my, at least the grandkids that I have now. There's special messages that I want to leave behind just for them, things that I want to say to them, and I don't want to put that out there in the world, for everybody to make something out of, or read something into, or turn it into something else. And we see that happen every day on Facebook, social media. Things get totally blown out of proportion. And so there, part of this is a way for parents and grandparents to really be able to speak to the generations to come. So pretty much, pretty much anybody that's looking to leave behind their story in a particular way, I think it fits that audience. But there's some special people, that I think this means a lot to, people who discover, like in my case, their parents have Alzheimer's. Just matter of fact, I learned just the other day of a friend who they found out their mom has symptoms of Alzheimer's. Well, I boxed up one of the books I just got, or packaged it up, sent it to them, said, "Hey, you need to let me tell you from experience, you need to get started." So people who have diseases like that, and of course, I'm all for them finding a cure, and maybe they will, and they won't need my book for that anymore. People who have a good friend whose sister died from a cancer. And so people who have cancer victims, and especially when they find out it's maybe something incurable, and their days are numbered and limited, and this is an opportunity for them to sit down in a creative way and start saying, well, let's tell your story, because we don't want your story to get away. Are people who have kids, and I would encourage anybody that's got younger kids. I have a friend that she lost both of her, two of her three kids to automobile accidents in their teenage years, and so the only the one sibling that's left, there's some stories that he doesn't know because he was younger, and if they adopt kids, then who are these people that we keep hearing about? So parents, because you never know when something like that's going to happen. Even people, I have some really good friends that we talk a little bit about in the book. The mom was killed because in the middle of the night, a tornado hit their home and scattered their belongings over, I don't know how many acres. So the boys that are left and the husband that are left, there's not much story. There's no past, kind of like you were saying a minute ago. All they had is, we got bits and pieces of paper. And so, having a system where you've put this stuff down and got it together in a place, We don't have our wedding pictures because we had all our wedding pictures in a box and we moved, and when we moved one time we put them on the floor next to the wall to keep them safe. Little did we know that the pipe in the wall would leak and leaked into the box and destroyed all the pictures. So we got a few proofs, of that. So those things happen. So it's a matter of saying, I want to preserve stuff, and I think everybody has an opportunity to that. But cancer victims, cancer survivors, to tell their story, people with diseases, especially mental diseases or memory diseases, with good candidates. Parents, grandparents are getting up in years. They're all are candidates, I think, for the book, because it's the biggest thing I think for it, Tammy, is it's a way to get started. Mm-hmm. And I just found that most people, if they ever get started, they're on their way. But it's kind of like, I don't know how to get started.
Right. Well, I think you're absolutely right, because like you said, you give 50 questions, you give them idea starters, you give them an idea of where to start, so they're not sitting there looking at a blank page. And I understand that not only is this a book, but you give people access to some software that can help them to, I guess, really create a legacy with this, so that they don't have the box of photos situation where everything gets wrecked if the computer blows up or crashes, or it's on paper, and something happens, or there's a hurricane. I mean, I live in Florida, there's always that risk that some natural disaster could happen, and your books or papers or whatever, or computer, believe me, I don't even know what I have on a hard drive that I can't access anymore. What is this software? And tell me a little bit about that, because that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, in 6 years ago, when I found out about my mom's Alzheimer's situation, I kind of got on a quest to say, well, how do I make sure that my kids and grandkids and other people, get access to people's stories? Well, at that time, QR codes had kind of started making a big come, into the marketplace, and people starting to use QR codes. And one of my businesses, I was promoting, mobile marketing, and that QR code was a big deal. Well, then I realized, well, wait a minute, what if you take a QR code and you put it on a grave marker, and people could take their phone and scan that, and then a video file or an audio file came on and shared this person's story. I thought, that's cool. So I talked to monument and grave marker companies, in the United States, and they, oh yeah, we can do that. We can even engrave it, when we do their name, that can be done. That's no problem. Oh, that's cool. Well, of course, back then most people would think, 6 years ago, okay, well. There weren't as many, and everybody didn't have a smartphone 6 years ago. For our listeners who don't know about non-smartphones, people still had flip phones and analog phones, and so there was an issue there, technology. And then the other issue was, on the other end, there was no easy way to get that from the phone to a server, to have access for it to read the QR code. All that hadn't happened yet. I know it's hard for some people at the moment to think, oh man, we always had this. We didn't, even 6 years ago. And so I kind of let the idea drop, because it just seemed totally unfeasible. But in that quest, I had talked to some people about my idea, and everybody, oh yeah, this is a great idea. And of course, some people thought it was kind of weird that you're dead, that your ancestors could talk to you from the grave. I said, nah, I think it'll catch on. And but the technology didn't exist on either end. Well, in the conversation, both parties kind of left that there. Well, eventually, a programmer, had this similar situation happen to him with a friend who left behind envelopes in his home, and each envelope was separated out, and he trusted his friend, so he said, make sure each one of these envelopes get to the appropriate person, and hid him what we talked about in this whole thing of, oh, wait a minute, I can do this digitally. And of course, by then the cloud computer had come along, and things were now a little safer and more secure. So he set out on a quest to develop this system, to create a digital if you please, time capsule feature that you could put your digital downloads, videos, documents that you scan, all that kind of stuff, and then be able to direct them to the people that you wanted by, of course, giving them a password that they would have, and then giving each person a set of trustees that would notify the company that you'd passed, and then the time capsules would be dispersed. So that's kind of how that idea was born. So we kind of married our ideas here, and part of my book is it not only just get you started, but also, well, here's how you keep it alive forever, because you can put your stuff in your own cloud, and that's fine. But the problem is, if people don't know your passwords, or don't know that you've put them in the cloud, then they're still stuck. It's like burying a treasure box, but not giving anybody a map. Nobody ever knows they're there until accidentally somebody finds them. So this software gives you the capability of 10 capsules that you can assign to people, and you can put in them what you want to, and then you have 3 trustees who basically you designate to notify this company that when you've passed, to say they've passed, and they'll then release those time capsules to people. So you can edit them, update them, all that kind of thing. So it keeps everything secure. It's for this. It's really built for this idea that we're talking about.
Wow, that's really cool. So how can we get more information about your books and access to all this good information?
Yeah, you can find out about my books at my website. Get the book. That's singular. Get the book. Dean Renfro says SAYS.com. That's kind of a hub page for the books I'm writing, because we're going to release some more books built around these special niches of people with special questions for each one of those kind of areas of interest, as we have the opportunity, because I have connections to people that have cancer victims. Well, I'm interviewing them to say, well, what questions do people need to answer about this, and veterans and those kinds of things, so that people know who are connected to those people, how to get those stories out of them and put them into something like a book and a journal, and then get them into some kind of time capsule system where they're preserved for the generations to come. But get the book. DeanRenfroSays.com is where they can access that. And of course, the book's going to be accessed on Amazon. You can just type in my name, Dean Renfro, DeanRenfro, and I'll come up as an author, and you can find the books.
Great. I can see how people could use these for a lot of different things, especially in the health arena.
Yep.
When, like you said, in your own experience, there's sometimes we have genes or something that you need to know you have, so that you are going to have children with somebody, the consequences in advance if you would have some kind of problem. Well, Dean.
And even medical situations, that maybe have been in your family.
Mm-hmm.
That because I know if you were to ask my kids, well, tell us about your parents' family history, health history, and it'd be like looking at a blank page, and then go, well, my parents have never really ever been sick. I don't think they have any issues. Well, there are a couple that their doctor would need to know about, but
yeah, well, most of us walk around and we're fairly healthy until one day we're not.
Yep.
So, so I think it is important for us to have a plan, and this really does fall into the planning or pre-planning stage. And then it also, the beauty of it is, not only is it a useful tool, but it's also a gift.
Yes.
A gift to the future.
Yep.
And it leaves a legacy. That I think that's what I really get from it. The fact that I could leave a gift so that all of those children yet to come will know who I was, and how much I cared about them, even though they weren't even here yet. Yeah. So that's really a cool thing. Well, Dean, I really appreciate you taking the time with me today.
I appreciate the opportunity to share with you and your listeners, and again, I just, a labor of love births a lot of things, and I just want to encourage people, get the book, work the process. And as I talk about on one statement in the book is 100 years from now, people will thank you that you did, because it'll make that big of a difference in somebody's life down the road.
I absolutely agree. So everyone, this is Tammy Patzer. Go make it a great day.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.